Welcome, everyone. We're diving into ancient Egyptian medicine today. You guys sent us some really fascinating stuff, and we're ready to dig in.
Yeah, it's going to be a real journey back in time, exploring how a civilization thousands of years ago saw medicine and healing.
Our guide for this deep dive is Gustave Lefebvre's Essai sur la médecine égyptienne à l'époque pharaonique. This book is all about ancient medical papyri, right?
That's right. Lefebvre analyzes those papyri to understand how healers in ancient Egypt viewed the body and treated all sorts of illnesses.
Those papyri must be incredible primary sources to work with.
Absolutely incredible. They give us such a unique window into their world.
Okay, so let's talk about these papyri. What are they like? Are they like ancient medical textbooks?
You could say that, but there's so much more. You find practical remedies and treatments alongside incantations and spells, all mixed together.
Wait, really? Incantations. So magic was a significant part of their medicine.
Oh, totally intertwined. The line between magic and medicine was pretty blurry for them. They believed that illness could come from both physical and spiritual causes.
Yeah, that makes sense given their whole worldview and belief system. It's a long way from our modern scientific approach.
It is. But even with the differences, there are these surprising moments of insight and observation that we can still appreciate today.
You know, I'm curious about the healers themselves. Did they have different specialties like we do today?
You might be surprised to hear that they did. Ancient Egypt had specialized healers, just like modern doctors. They had swoon-urdi, which were doctors who focused on certain areas, like the eyes or the digestive system.
Wow, so they had like ancient Egyptian ophthalmologists and gastroenterologists. That's amazing.
Exactly. And their specialization went beyond that, too. They had healers dedicated to childbirth and even dentistry.
That's pretty impressive for a civilization so long ago. Okay, so what about their knowledge of anatomy? Did they have a decent understanding of how the body worked?
They did, especially when it came to the cardiovascular system. They understood that the heart was vital and had a pretty good grasp of its function.
So they knew it was more than just a symbolic organ.
Oh, absolutely. And here's something really fascinating. They had this concept of metu. These were channels they believed carried air, fluids, and waste throughout the body.
That sounds a bit like their understanding of the Nile, right? A network of channels keeping everything alive.
It's a perfect analogy. They believed that blockages or imbalances in these metu caused many illnesses. It's a surprisingly holistic view of the body.
Makes you wonder if they were onto something about circulation and the lymphatic system, even without the scientific tools to explain it.
You know, it really does make you think. It challenges our ideas about what ancient civilizations knew. One detail that really shows their unique perspective is that they believed the heart could speak when healthy.
A talking heart. What did they think it was saying?
They thought it was communicating with the rest of the body through these metu channels. So a healthy heart was actively talking, making sure everything worked in harmony.
That's such a vivid image. A silent heart meant trouble. I'm already seeing how their medical beliefs connected to their understanding of the world.
Exactly. Their worldview was woven into everything, including healing. It wasn't just about physical symptoms, but about the spiritual side of illness, too.
Speaking of treatment, let's say we're back in ancient Egypt and we're not feeling well. We go to a healer. What happens?
Well, based on the papyri, you'd get a pretty thorough examination. The healer would observe your symptoms, ask about how you're feeling overall, and even check your pulse.
So even back then, they knew about listening to the patient and taking a holistic approach.
Absolutely. And their treatments were diverse, reflecting that blend of practical and magical approaches we talked about.
Okay, I got to hear about these treatments. Did they use herbs? What other techniques did they have?
They used plant-based remedies like crazy. Their knowledge of medicinal plants was extensive, but they also used animal fats, minerals, even things that might seem a bit weird to us today.
Weird like what? Give us an example of a remedy that stands out.
Well, there's the use of honey and bile for eye ailments.
Honey and bile. That's a bold combination.
Yeah, right. But it's interesting, you find hints of this remedy in other ancient traditions, too. Remember the story of Tobit in the Bible where fish gall is used to cure blindness? This idea was around for a while.
So even if their understanding of the body wasn't the same as ours, they were observing patterns and finding ways to ease suffering.
Exactly. And those observations led them to treatments that, while they might seem odd to us, had some logic behind them. Makes you wonder what we do now that'll seem out there in the future.
Right, like what'll future doctors think of our current practices?
Exactly. But let's get back to the magic for a second. We touched on it earlier, but can we explore that a bit more? What exactly did those incantations and spells involve?
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that. It's such a different approach from what we're used to, but it fits their worldview, doesn't it?
Totally. Remember, they believed illness could come from evil forces just as easily as from physical causes.
So it wasn't just about physical symptoms, but about those spiritual dangers too.
Right, and that's why incantations, amulets, and rituals were so important in their healing practices. They believed words and symbols held power, like they could actually affect health and well-being.
Do any specific examples come to mind from those incantations?
You know, Lefebvre's book actually has a few taken right from the papyri. There's one for a coryza, basically a cold, that calls on the gods Re and Thoth to kick the illness out.
So like a prayer asking for divine help to get better.
There are definitely similarities there, and it's interesting, this incantation actually talks to the illness itself, like a person telling it to leave.
Wow, that's intense imagery. It's like a spiritual battle against the illness, not just a physical one.
Exactly. It really shows how they believed words and rituals could actually influence the course of an illness.
What about amulets? We mentioned them before. What role did they play?
Amulets were thought to protect against certain illnesses or bad forces. You'd wear them, keep them at home, even bury them with the dead for protection in the afterlife.
But a magical shield against disease or bad luck?
Exactly. And the materials and symbols they used matter. For example, a scarab beetle amulet could symbolize rebirth and healing.
It's amazing how much meaning they packed into those objects.
Yeah.
Did they ever worry about using the wrong symbol or incantation? Like, could you accidentally make things worse?
That's a great question. Considering their belief in magic, I bet they were super careful about choosing the right rituals and symbols. They even had specific incantations for bandaging and giving medicine.
Yeah, it makes sense. You wouldn't want to call on the wrong god or summon a bad spirit by mistake while trying to heal someone.
Right, the stakes were high when dealing with the supernatural. But alongside all the magic, they were very practical, too. We talked about how much they knew about medicinal plants.
Yes, and I'm dying to know more. What were some of the key plants they used? And what did they think they could treat?
Oh, they had a whole pharmacy going on using the diversity of the Nile Valley. Poppies were big for pain relief, and garlic, onions, and cumin were used for their antibacterial and anti-inflammatory properties.
So some of their ingredients actually did have benefits, even if they didn't know exactly how they worked.
Right. And it's important to remember that while some of their practices might seem a bit out there now, they were working with what they had. They were observing, experimenting, figuring out what worked.
And some of their observations were spot on. We still use honey for its antibacterial properties, and garlic has all sorts of health benefits. Makes you wonder what other ancient remedies might still have potential.
Absolutely. It's a good reminder that we can learn from the past, even if it means looking at old ideas in a new way.
You mentioned that their medical knowledge, while rooted in magic, was also based on observation. I think the Edwin Smith Papyrus really exemplifies that. It's considered one of the first surgical texts, right?
It is, and it's a fascinating look into their advanced understanding of trauma and wound care.
What makes this papyrus so special? What sets it apart?
Well, the Edwin Smith Papyrus is unique because it takes a systematic, almost scientific approach to treating injuries. It outlines clear methods for examining, diagnosing, and treating, much like a modern medical textbook.
So not just a bunch of random remedies, but a structured approach to surgery.
Exactly. Each case follows a specific format: a description of the injury, then the examination, the diagnosis, the prognosis, and finally, the treatment plan.
Wow, super organized. It sounds more like a scientific paper than a book of spells.
And that's what makes it so intriguing. It shows they had a practical, empirical side to their medicine alongside the magic, especially in surgery.
Okay, so what kinds of injuries did they deal with? Everyday accidents or more battle-related stuff?
It's mainly about traumatic injuries, the kind you'd see in battles or from accidents. Head wounds, fractures, dislocations, even spinal injuries.
Spinal injuries, that's serious stuff. What did they do for those?
Well, they didn't know about the spine as much as we do now, but they recognized how severe those injuries were. They figured out ways to immobilize the spine and try to stabilize the patient.
So even without our knowledge, they were finding ways to help with those incredibly difficult cases.
They were. And the papyrus goes into detail about their techniques. Like, for spinal fractures, they'd use wooden splints to keep the back still, sometimes even using bandages soaked in honey and resin.
Honey and resin. Sounds like a sticky situation.
I know, right? But remember, honey is a natural antibacterial, and resin can seal things up. That combo might have actually helped prevent infection.
So there was some logic behind these seemingly unusual treatments.
Quite often there was. The Edwin Smith Papyrus gives us a glimpse into that logic, revealing how observation and practical knowledge were at the heart of their surgery.
Okay, we've got splints and bandages. Did they do any actual surgical procedures, or was it mostly about stabilizing the injured area?
They did perform surgeries, but their options were limited compared to today. They were good at treating wounds, using sutures to close incisions and stitch up cuts. They even described cauterizing wounds to stop bleeding.
Cauterizing wounds. Ouch, that must have been painful.
No doubt about it. And they didn't have anesthesia back then. They had to do what they could to stop bleeding and prevent infections.
Definitely makes you appreciate modern pain management.
For sure. But despite the limitations, the Edwin Smith Papyrus shows a level of surgical skill and a systematic approach to wound care that was really advanced for the time.
It's pretty inspiring. It shows how, even with limited technology and knowledge, they came up with effective ways to treat serious injuries.
Absolutely. It speaks to the ingenuity and resilience of those ancient healers facing some really tough medical challenges.
This deep dive is really eye-opening. I'm seeing how complex and rich ancient Egyptian medicine really was. It's way more than just magic and superstition.
I agree. And as we explore further, it's important to approach it with a sense of wonder and a critical mind. We can appreciate their insights while also acknowledging what they didn't know.
We've covered so much, from magic spells to advanced surgical techniques. But before we wrap up, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the legacy of ancient Egyptian medicine. How did their practices and beliefs influence later medical traditions?
That's a great question. While some of their practices might seem outdated now, we have to remember they were trailblazers. They laid the foundation for many principles that shaped the future of medicine.
So even if their understanding wasn't always perfect, their contributions are significant.
Exactly. Their focus on observation, experimenting with remedies, trying to understand how the body worked as a whole, these were all important steps in the evolution of medicine.
It's a reminder that progress builds on what came before, even if those foundations seem a bit shaky looking back.
I couldn't agree more. And as we keep trying to understand the human body and find new ways to heal, it's important to acknowledge those who came before us, who paved the way, even if their path was different from ours. We're building on what they started, right? We see further thanks to their efforts, even if some of their methods seem a bit wild to us now.
Yeah, it's a good reminder to look at medical history with both respect and a critical eye.
Definitely. And while we're being critical, we can't forget that not all of their practices were effective or even safe. Some of their remedies, as we talked about, used things we now know can be harmful.
True. We can't romanticize the past and ignore that some treatments probably cause more harm than good.
Absolutely. But even those less successful attempts can teach us something. They show us how they saw the natural world and tried to use it, for better or worse.
It's all part of the story of medicine, right? A mix of breakthroughs and mistakes as we've tried to understand and heal the body.
Exactly. And that story keeps going as we make new discoveries and reinterpret old texts like these with modern science.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into ancient Egyptian medicine, what are the big takeaways? What can we learn from all this as we keep navigating the world of health and healing?
I think one of the biggest lessons is just how crucial observation is. The ancient Egyptians were amazing at observing the human body and the natural world. They really paid attention to symptoms, experimented with different remedies, and developed a surprisingly detailed understanding of anatomy, even if it wasn't always spot on.
It shows that no matter how advanced our technology gets, careful observation is still at the heart of good medicine.
You got it. And another thing is the importance of that holistic approach. The Egyptians knew illness wasn't just physical. It could affect you spiritually and emotionally, too.
So they were kind of early adopters of the mind-body connection, in a way.
In a sense, yeah. And their use of rituals, amulets, and incantations, even though they seem unusual to us now, shows they tried to address illness on all those levels. They knew that true healing often goes beyond just fixing the physical symptoms.
That's a lesson that's really relevant today as we rediscover how interconnected our physical, mental, and emotional health really is.
Absolutely. And finally, I think it's important to remember that medicine is a journey, not a destination. Those ancient Egyptians were pioneers, making incredible progress in their time, but their knowledge had limits based on the tools and understanding they had.
And our knowledge today has its own limits, too. It's humbling and exciting at the same time.
It is. It means we're still discovering, still unraveling mysteries. Who knows what amazing things we'll find out in the future? Maybe someday, future civilizations will look back at our practices with the same curiosity and skepticism that we have now about ancient Egypt.
That's a fascinating thought. As we keep going on this journey, it's important to remember and appreciate those who came before us. those who laid the groundwork for what we know today.
For sure, including those ancient Egyptian healers whose work and ideas still fascinate us. They remind us that the quest to heal is something humans have always done, driven by curiosity, compassion, and a desire to ease suffering.
Well said. On that note, we leave you with this. What will your legacy be in the story of medicine? What will you contribute to this ongoing journey of healing? Keep those questions in mind as you explore the amazing world of medicine, past, present, and future.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you all. May your own journey of discovery be filled with wonder, curiosity, and appreciation for how everything's connected.
This has been a fantastic deep dive. Thanks for joining us as we journeyed back in time to explore the world of ancient Egyptian medicine.